Now we're ready to go into more detail on each of our tissue types. We're going to begin with the epithelial tissues. And before we start describing each specific epithelial tissue type, I will make a list of the different tissue categories, types of epithelial tissue. These are organized according to shape and whether or not they occur in a single layer of cells or if they're multiple layers of cells, what we call stratified. Simple if it's a single layer, stratified if it's multiple. Now the shapes, squamous, so the first category, simple squamous. Squamous means flat. It's a flattened cell, so a simple layer, a single layer of flat cells. It'd be simple squamous. Several examples of that in your body we'll talk about. Next would be stratified squamous. Here you have many layers of cells, several layers of cells stacked one on the other, and only the top layer has to express that squamous shape. The ones down at the base of the layer near the basement membrane don't need to do that. Next is simple cuboidal. Cuboidal doesn't mean they're a perfect cube, it just means that they're approximately as tall as they are wide. Their length and width dimensions makes them roughly cuboidal. They look more like square pillows or something like that than actual cubes. They are sometimes low cuboidal, where they're a little bit shorter, or sometimes they're a little bit taller, but roughly cuboidal, roughly as tall as they are wide. Simple cuboidal epithelium. Occasionally you'll see stratified cuboidal. Epithelium in some parts of the body, mainly your sweat ducts and your salivary ducts, is where you would find those. Stratified cuboidal. Next, columnar cells, simple columnar. Are much taller than they are wide, and they look like columns. Simple columnar epithelium. It's very rare to see a stratified columnar epithelium like it was for stratified cuboidal. About the only place you find those are in the largest of your sweat duct, not sweat ducts, your salivary ducts. Your largest salivary ducts have a stratified columnar epithelium. Now, we've taken care of most of our different shapes here, but there's a kind of epithelium that's referred to as pseudostratified columnar. It looks like maybe it's made of multiple layers of cells, but in fact all of the cells make contact with the basement membrane and extend up from the basement membrane of varying heights, and they squeeze together to make them look like multiple layers of cells when they're not. So pseudostratified columnar epithelium through most of your respiratory system. You can find some of that. And let's see, the last category is what we call transitional. That means it can change its shape, mostly rounded cells, but they can flatten out somewhat and be stretched and change. So they're called transitional. Those are our 8 categories of epithelial tissues, 8 categories of epithelial tissues. So now we'll look in detail at simple squamous epithelium. Simple squamous epithelium is, of course, a single layer of cells. It's simple, not stratified, not multiple layers of cells. Squamous means flat. It's an epithelium, so it's going to be on a covering or lining and have a basement membrane. I always draw the basement membrane in orange, so my orange line here will represent the basement membrane. And then on top of that, I'll draw in my different cells. Usually I make the cell outline in red. Use a red marker to do that. So here's a simple squamous cell, here's another simple squamous cell, and another on here like this. So a single layer of cells on a basement membrane. The top would be the free surface, and in these cells you'll have a nucleus, and it's fairly common to see your nucleus kind of squished flat in the cell, conforms with the flatness of the cell, something of that sort. So that's simple squamous epithelium, a single layer of flattened cells. Places where you find the simple squamous epithelium, I'm going to go ahead and write this, get the right word. I'll start with endothelium, I think, first. Endothelium. Endothelium is the cell type that you find lining your blood vessels and inside your heart, inside your lymph vessels as well. I'll just write blood vessels out here because that's what we usually associate with this term. Endothelium, single layer of flattened cells. Next, mesothelium, associated with mesenteries. That's where the MES comes in, mesenteries. Mesenteries and membranes that cover your organs and line your body cavities are mesothelial layers. So, put here, line body cavities. That means like your abdominal cavity, your pleural cavities that have your lungs, and your pericardial cavity where your heart is found. Those are the kinds of cavities we're talking about there. And cover the organs within the body cavities. Now, many of your organs are connected to each other or to the body wall with a sheet of material, a very thin layer of material, a very transparent layer of material in there that's simply called a mesentery. So I'll put here mesenteries. So those things are mesothelium. Third category, inside your lungs, where you have that interface between your air space of your lung, lies right next to a blood vessel, so we can get oxygen to travel across from the air to the blood. We have a couple of simple squamous cells in there. Of course, the blood vessel is lined with endothelium, but in the lung we have another type of flattened cell. We usually refer to it as a type 1 alveolar cell. Type 1 alveolar cell, that flattened cell in the alveoli, that's the little airspace, small air sacs inside the lung. They are lined with type 1 cells, simple squamous cells. One more location where we find this, when we study the kidney, we're going to study a structure called Bowman's capsule. Bowman's capsule is the place where, that cavity where fluid moves out of the blood, out of small capillaries into a space, a capsule, the Bowman's capsule. So surrounding Bowman's capsule, we have simple squamous cells. Surrounding Bowman's capsule. So those are 4 locations where we have simple squamous epithelium. Now for stratified squamous epithelium, we're going to again begin on a basement membrane, and on this basement membrane we will have cells, we'll outline in red here. At the base they will not be squamous, they'll be irregular shapes, rounded or nearly cuboidal in shape. So somewhat irregular in shape, and then the next layer up. And then the next layer up. And as we move toward the surface, they become more and more flattened. So as long as we have flattened cells on the surface, this is going to be a squamous type of epithelium. Again, we have a basement membrane down below, we have a free surface above, and then our layers are stacked between the basement membrane and this free surface we have here. Now, stratified squamous epithelium can occur in two different forms. Non-keratinized or keratinized. If it's keratinized, the cells on the very surface are dead cells. They're going to be layers and layers of dead cells on the surface, like on our skin, especially on the heel of our foot or the palms of our hands. Several layers, many layers of dead cells there. As you go down through those layers of cells in a keratinized epithelium, eventually you get to some of these irregularly shaped cells, more flattened, but then all of these down below are living cells. They have nuclei, cells at the base divide, and as they divide, they add more cells to the next layer. And these cells, once they move to the next layer, they don't divide any further. They are just pushed up by the addition of more cells down below from that basal layer. So anyway, this thickness increases. And we'll talk more about keratinized stratified squamous epithelium when we talk about the epidermis of the skin, because that's our primary example of keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, the epidermis. Non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, more like what I've drawn here, can be found in the oral cavity. So lining your mouth, you have a stratified squamous epithelium that is non-keratinized. It has flat cells on the surface, and those flat cells have a nucleus, and they're not dead cells until they're sloughed off and die. Oral cavity, the esophagus, and vagina are locations where you find non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Simple cuboidal epithelium rests on a basement membrane again. These cells are roughly as tall as they are wide, so they appear pretty much as square-like shapes on a basement membrane, and they have a free surface. Single layer of cells, because this is a simple epithelium, simple cuboidal epithelium. Like this. Each of them would have a single nucleus to the inside. Examples of places where you find this. You find it on the surface of the ovary, in thyroid follicles, thyroid follicles are little cavities that contain a precursor to your thyroid hormone. They're like little gel packets, little bubble-like packets that are surrounded on the outside by a single layer of cuboidal cells, thyroid follicles. Your kidney tubules, that's a good one. kidney tubule. So as the urine passes through these tiny tubes, water is reabsorbed and urine is changed as it passes through those tubes before it dumps into collecting ducts that drain into the renal pelvis. So anyway, kidney tubules. The next one would be small salivary ducts. And ducts of maybe some other kinds of glands you could think of, small ducts in the body. But anyway, these are some examples of tissue or places where you find this kind of tissue, this simple cuboidal epithelium. So next on our list is the stratified cuboidal epithelium. Again, we start with a layer of basement membrane, and on that basement membrane we'll put some cells. Remember, this is stratified, so there's going to be more than one layer of cells, and the ones at the base are not necessarily neatly cuboidal like those on the surface, but anyway, we've got some cells down here. And then we have the surface cells that are more cuboidal, more regular in shape. Like this. The locations where we find this include some of your medium-sized salivary ducts and your sweat ducts. I'm going to make another picture here in a minute that shows what a duct will look like in cross-section, not a flat view like this, but a circular view. But I'll just go ahead and write down here, medium salivary ducts. And sweat ducts. The ducts of your sweat gland. So if we were to make a cross section of one of these ducts, look, we cut through the skin, this is the way we usually see it histologically, we would see a circular basement membrane around the outside. In the middle would be the cavity of the duct, a tubular passage, what we often refer to as a lumen. The lumen is the cavity of an internal structure. So we would have one layer of cells up against the basement membrane here. The more irregular cells. And then out toward the middle we would have a fairly even lumen space here with our cuboidal cells spaced out around this. So that would be a stratified cuboidal epithelium in a duct, like a sweat duct. In a medium salivary duct, we'd have the same kind of wall, but the luminal space in the center would be bigger on a typical medium salivary duct. So anyway, that's stratified cuboidal epithelium. Okay, so next is simple columnar epithelium. Simple columnar epithelium sits on a basement membrane, has cells that are taller than they are wide. It's a single layer since it's simple columnar epithelium. So we have tall cells in a row. Simple columnar epithelium. Now we're going to put nuclei in them, and the nuclei usually are found in a fairly uniform position across the row of columnar cells. So they look like they're all soldiers in a row kind of arrangement here. Real even look to the columnar epithelium. Places where you would find simple columnar epithelium include your stomach lining, all of your intestines, your gallbladder, bile ducts. Those are some of the places where you're going to see a simple columnar epithelium. There may be some other places as well, but that's a good list. Simple columnar epithelium. Stratified columnar epithelium. The cells at the base of the epithelium are not columnar at all. They'll be irregular small cells. And then above that you'll have the columnar shapes, usually very even at the top. Usually just two layers like this. Places where you find this, there's really just the larger salivary glands, larger ducts of salivary glands. May occasionally be seen, and as far as that goes, also stratified cuboidal. Sometimes comes in the interface between transitional epithelium and stratified squamous epithelium in the urethra, but it's very irregular and not a good place to go looking for it, actually. So anyway, this is predictable. Large ducts of salivary glands will have this stratified columnar epithelium. Pseudostratified columnar epithelium. All of the cells in the pseudostratified columnar epithelium have contact with the basement membrane. Not all of them reach to the top of the surface layer. So you get a whole bunch of very irregular shapes, and their nuclei are situated in different positions in different cells. So it looks like it could be multiple layers of cells across here, but the nuclei are just in different positions in each of the cells. And like I said, some of these cells do not reach all the way from the basal membrane to the surface. So this gives us this pseudostratified look, falsely stratified look, pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Places where you find this, there are actually several in the body, but we associate it mainly with respiratory passages. So olfactory epithelium, where you have your sense of smell, is this pseudostratified columnar epithelium. What we generally refer to as respiratory epithelium. Lines like your sinus passages, your nasal passages, and then once you get into your windpipe and into your larynx, your trachea, and your primary bronchi, secondary bronchi, all of those passageways have that pseudostratified columnar epithelium. It's not uncommon in some of the male reproductive system ducts, so the ductus deferens. Has a pseudostratified columnar epithelium. So anyway, it's usually ciliated, has cilia at the top and all of the respiratory epithelium that helps to move particles out of your lungs or away from your mucous membranes and combine them with the mucus so that it will be swallowed, all that debris, particles, dust, and so on. So that's pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Next, transitional. Our final epithelial type. Cells rest on a basement membrane. Transitional is stratified. It has multiple layers of cells. It's not called stratified transitional, I guess, because there's not a simple transitional. You have a number of smaller cells down at the base of transitional epithelium. And then as you go up, the cells get a little bit bigger. They're all pretty much rounded cells. The nuclei in each of the cells is about the same size as you go from the bottom to the top. But because the cells are smaller down here in the lower layer, it looks like the nuclei are a little more crowded. And then when you get up here in the higher levels, the nuclei seem to be more spaced out. Not as tightly packed in the upper layers as they are in the lower layers of the epithelium. That's one of the easy identifying features for transitional epithelium. Also the very rounded cell shapes at the surface. Now it's called transitional because it can stretch. This is found in the urinary bladder. So when the urinary bladder enlarges, these cells all flatten out a bit. So this is the relaxed state. We'll call this relaxed. Sometimes it's called contracted state. And if we were to distend it, to stretch it, our cells at the bottom would do some stretching, but each of them proportionately would not have to do quite as much stretching as those that are toward the surface. So in the stretched state, the transitional epithelium has thinner layers all the way around there, but the cells at the surface are a little more flattened. They're not squamous. They're just not as round as they were before. So they undergo this change in shape. They're transitional. I've already mentioned that these are found in the urinary bladder. By the way, this is the stretched or distended type. Urinary bladder. And really it's only found in the urinary system. So as you go from the renal pelvis, really inside the kidney is where this starts, in the renal pelvis, you have that extend through the ureters that lead down to the urinary bladder and then into the urethra through most, but not all, of the urethra. Contains transitional epithelium. So that's the last of our 8 different epithelial categories, transitional epithelium.